All right, so lesson 38, powers of sums, solving by factoring. Powers of sums means you have something that you're adding. So you're going to put that in the parentheses, and then you're going to put an exponent on it. So you see this exponent of 2 out after the last parentheses. Whenever you have parentheses to a power, what I want to see you guys doing, if my stylus will decide it wants to work for me, is to write out the parentheses. Since it's parentheses squared, we're going to write parentheses times parentheses. Put in whatever we have inside of it into both of those parentheses, or however many parentheses you have. And then we are going to FOIL that. So if I take first times first, 2x squared times 2x squared is 4x to the fourth. Outside times outside, 2x squared times 3y is a positive 6x squared y. And then inside times inside is going to be another 6x squared y. And last times last, 3y times 3y gives us a plus 9y squared. Now, does that look good to everybody? And if anybody sees a mistake that I make at any time, I want to see hands up right away here in the class. Don't let me go on farther and waste your time continuing to make a mistake through the rest of it. So then we look at that, and those of you in the classroom, does anybody see like terms? Raise a hand. Okay, Tim, which ones are like? These two middle ones, so we combine. Final answer is then 4x to the fourth plus 12x squared y plus 9y squared. So just remember to write it out so you don't miss some of the terms. You do not get just 4x to the fourth plus 9y squared. So don't forget those middle terms that you get by FOILing. Sometimes we'll have even higher powers that we're going to go to. So in this case, we have the parentheses 3 times. So we are going to write parentheses, parentheses, parentheses. Put the x plus 2 inside of each one of those. And then when you multiply any 3 numbers, you pick 2 of them and multiply them, and then you multiply that answer times the third one. So I want to pick any 2 of these parentheses and FOIL them, and then I'll take that answer times the other parentheses. I'm going to choose the last 2 to multiply first. Does not matter, but just because I want to end up with my short parentheses on the first for the final step. I just kind of like it better if my short parentheses ends up on the left. So we FOIL, and you guys probably all can tell me very quickly, we get x squared plus 2x plus another 2x and a plus 4. Does anybody have a question on that? I don't see anybody waving at me from home. I don't see any comments in the chat yet. Don't see any hands up in class. So far, so good. Okay, then we are going to distribute term by term. X times x squared is x cubed. X times 4x is 4x squared. That's supposed to be a cubed, but you can't really eat it. That's better. And x times 4x is a plus 4x. And I'm going to do the same thing with the 2 times everything. And I like to line mine up as I'm writing it if I can, just so it's easier to find the like terms. 2 times x squared is a 2x squared. 2 times 4x is 8x. And 2 times 4 is 8. So Kevin, glad you made it in late. We're working on the notes on 38. Then we're going to combine those like terms. X cubed plus 6x squared plus 12x plus 8. And that is our final answer on this one. So the whole trick, powers of sums, is write out parentheses times parentheses however many times you need to, and then just start distributing. All right, the other thing that we're going to talk about is when we are solving quadratics by factoring. We're going to use something called the zero factor theorem. So when we are solving an equation, that means we have something not just equals, but equals another side. We've got to have two things with an equal sign between them, or it's impossible to solve it. We could simplify, we could expand, we could factor, but we can't solve unless we have both sides of the equation. Zero factor theorem says move things around as you need to so that you get something equals zero. Zero factor theorem only works if one side is zero. Then what we are going to try to do is to factor the other side. The zero factor theorem says if I take some things and multiply them and get zero, at least one of the numbers that I multiply has to be zero. I can have 0 times 1,000,000, that's 0. I can have a half times 0, that's 0. I can have 0 times 0, that's 0. But if I don't have a 0 in there, 1 times 7/3, 12 times -14, I cannot get 0 unless I've got at least one 0 in there as a factor. So we are going to be solving a lot of equations by factoring. So if we want to solve this particular one, we need to get 0 over here. We don't have that yet. So we're going to subtract the 6 from both sides. And I'm also going to rearrange the left so that it's in standard form and easier to see how to factor. So I want everybody in the classroom on your papers, write down what you think the factors are on this. Everybody at home, type it in the chat, but wait just a moment before you hit enter on there. We know that these are going to have to each start with x. Since this is a 1x squared, that's going to be the only way we can possibly get x squared. I need two things that multiply to be -6 and add to be -1. So write down what you think the factors are. On your papers if you're in class. Okay, people at home, go ahead and hit enter so I can see what you've come up with. I should see a whole bunch of them popping up there. Looks like we are in agreement with everybody at home. Let's see if that's what people in the classroom also got. An x -3 and an x +2. Those of you in the classroom, thumbs up, thumbs down, or heads nodding or shaking. So we're in good shape. That means that either the first parentheses is 0 or the second parentheses is 0 or both. So x is 3 or x is -2. Everybody good with those as your two answers? By factoring. This step right here on one this easy I won't require. When we start getting ones that are things like 17x minus 34 equals 0, let's start writing those down where we have to do a little bit of work and it's not obvious what the answers are. Okay, so let's try another one here. So is this already equal to 0? So we can factor it, but this one is not going to be as easy to factor. This one, we don't have a GCF, so we don't start with 1x squared. So we have to use that AC method, where this is A, B, and C. So A times C is 18. We need two things that multiply to be 18 and add to be -19. So somebody in the classroom, what two numbers would multiply to be 18 and add to be -19? What would we get then? So we need -18 and -1. So we are going to rewrite this middle term, -18x and -1x, and it does not matter which one comes first. I'm going to choose to do the -1x first and then the -18x, but you could do it either way. and then the plus 3 equals 0. So I have not changed the problem. Minus x minus 18x is the same as the minus 19x. Then it becomes factoring by grouping. So we're going to look for a GCF on those two. So somebody in the classroom, what's my GCF on those two? What do I get there? So we're going to pull an x out of that, which leaves 6x minus 1. And then for the last two, we're going to group those together. My GCF there is either going to be 3 or negative 3. If I do a plus 3, then I would have a minus 6x in there, and that's not going to match. So I don't like that. So I'm going to do a minus 3 instead. Minus 3 times positive 6x is minus 18x. And minus 3 times minus 1 is a plus 3. Then to finish up the factoring by grouping, I've got x minus 3 and 6x minus 1, and it does not matter which one of those comes first. Zero factor theorem says that either the x minus 3 is 0 or the 6x minus 1 is 0. So x is 3. Now this one, I don't really care if you wrote this part or not. This one, it's a little bit harder, and I don't want to see you guys making silly mistakes, so I would like you to write one out like that. So then you can say 6x is 1, divide both sides by 6, and x is the fraction 1/6. Does everybody feel okay there? Okay, this one. We don't have everything on one side, do we? So we need to get everything on one side. And I like to always try to start with a plus if I can on the one with the biggest degree. So I've got this minus x cubed. 3 is my biggest exponent. But I don't really want to say, bring the 36x over there, because I'm going to have that minus x cubed. So instead, I'm going to change sides, change signs, bring the x cubed over to this side and make it positive. Bring the 16x squared over to the left and change it from a positive to a negative. Keep the negative 36x on the left so it does not change signs. First step always needs to be look for the GCF. So what's my GCF on the left? Everybody in class, just say it out loud. So we're going to factor out an x, which means we are then factoring x squared minus 16x minus 36. Okay, again, we have one that we ought to be able to factor here. We need two things that multiply to be negative 36 and add to be negative 16. So we're going to have two parentheses. They're both going to start with x. So everybody in class, write down what you think those would be. Everybody at home, type it in the chat. Wait to hit enter. Okay, those at home, go ahead and type for me what your parentheses are now. And so to multiply to get a negative 36 and add to be negative 16, we needed a minus 18 and a plus 2. So most of the ones at home have indeed said minus 18 and plus 2 right there. Now we have three factors, two parentheses, and one that's just an x. Any of those three could be 0. So the x could be 0, the x could be 18, or the x could be negative 2. Everybody good there? Okay, and one last example on this before we move on to the other lesson. Solve this by factoring. What should we always look for first on anything that's factoring? What do we need to look for? We're going to look for a GCF. Well, actually, I should have said first we make sure it equals 0, which it does. Then we look for GCF. This one, the GCF, is going to be 2. So we pull that out in front. Now we want to try to factor that. And once again, both of these will start with an x. So we need two numbers that multiply to be -28 and add to be -3. If you're at home, type it in the chat. If you're here in the classroom, write it down. And who in class wants to tell me what this is this time? Kim? So -7 and a +4. So this factor tells us that x could be a -4. This factor tells us x could be 7. We have this other factor out here, 2. Can it ever be equal to 0? So that one doesn't do anything for us. We only have these two answers. When you have x squared in your equation, you'll usually have two different answers. The only time you won't would be if it factors as x + 2 times x + 2, both parentheses match. If you have an x cubed, you'll probably have 3 answers. So does everybody feel pretty comfortable on that? Okay, let me stop this recording, load the